The birthday card was still in its envelope. I recognized the handwriting, instantly mine. Of course, careful, small, cursive letters curling along the front, like they were afraid to take up space. I'd slipped it into a small box with a new shirt I'd saved up for something I thought he might wear to work. It wasn't anything fancy, just soft and neutral, the kind of thing he always reached for in the stores when I used to go shopping with him. That was months ago. And now here it was, unopened, shoved in the corner of his kitchen counter beneath grocery receipts, crumpled junk mail, and an empty bottle of soda. He hadn't even noticed me pick it up. I didn't say anything. I just stood there, staring at the envelope like it might open itself if I waited long enough. I had tied a little ribbon around the shirt, too. Pale blue, delicate, the kind of detail a mother adds even when her son is nearly 40. My heart gave a small, dull ache. Not a sharp stab, I think the sharpness had dulled over the years. This one was quieter, a silent disappointment that just lingered. He had invited me over because his wife was out with friends, and he needed someone to keep an eye on the baby while he caught up on work. I had said yes, of course. I always said yes, even when my knees ached, even when I hadn't slept, even when I hadn't heard from him in weeks. He didn't offer me tea. He didn't ask how I was. He just kissed the air near my cheek and muttered, "Thanks for coming," before disappearing into his home office. I sat there in his house that didn't smell like mine, holding that unopened card, realizing I had written "Love, Mom" in ink that was probably faded now. I could still picture myself at the kitchen table, licking the envelope closed, choosing a sticker with a little golden heart to seal it. I thought he might smile when he saw it. I thought maybe, just maybe this time, he'd call and say, "Thanks, Mom." That meant a lot. But no, he never even saw it. Or maybe he did, and just didn't care. And what stung more than the card being unopened was how unsurprised I felt. I think a small part of me knew before I even picked it up. That little box had become invisible to him, like I had. I rocked his baby to sleep that day, the same way I used to rock him when he was small and fragile and needed me more than air. I watched his daughter's tiny chest rise and fall, and I whispered lullabies she didn't know came from the same voice that once sang to her father. I hummed through the lump in my throat. When he finally emerged, he didn't notice my red eyes. He didn't ask if I needed anything. He just said, "I'll call you next week," and closed the door behind me before I even made it to the steps. I carried the unopened card home with me. I didn't know why. Maybe I couldn't bear to leave it behind, knowing it would end up in the trash with everything else he doesn't need anymore. Maybe I just wanted to hold it one last time, proof that I tried, that I was here, that I remembered. That evening, I sat in my quiet kitchen, placed the card on the table, and stared at it again under the dim light of the overhead lamp. The house was still the kind of stillness that presses against your ears. I boiled water for tea, not because I wanted it, but because it gave me something to do. I thought of all the birthdays, the cakes I made from scratch when money was tight, the tiny presents wrapped in newspaper with bows made from yarn. He used to beam when he saw them. He used to run to me, arms flung wide. He used to say, "Thank you, Mama." Now even silence feels like too much effort. And still I never asked for much. I never wanted to be celebrated. I didn't need grandeur. Just a moment. One sentence. One glance that said, "I see you. I remember." I never got it. And yet I keep hoping, even as I fold away that card and place it in the drawer, where I keep my old letters and faded receipts, that maybe one day he'll remember the softness of my hands, the warmth of my voice, the way I always showed up. But hope is heavy, and it grows heavier each year. There was a winter when the power went out, and the cold crept into every corner of the house like an uninvited guest. I remember wrapping him in layers of blankets, his tiny feet tucked into the folds of my old sweater. I sat with him all night, rocking him near the flicker of a candle, humming softly to drown out the howling wind. I was hungry. He didn't know that. I'd used the last bit of rice to make him porridge. I said I wasn't hungry, that I'd already eaten, and he believed me as children do. That's how it always was. My needs were the first to be hidden, not because I didn't have them, but because his always came first. I made peace with that, or at least I thought I had. I can still picture myself at the kitchen table late at night sewing patches onto his jeans. The fabric was worn thin at the knees. Boys always tear up the knees. I didn't want him teased at school. I didn't want the other children to notice the way his clothes were frayed, or that the soles of his shoes flapped when he walked. I'd stitch carefully, choosing the thread to match the denim, trying to make it look less like repair and more like care. There were nights I'd cry silently while stitching, not because I was sad necessarily, just tired. Tired in the way that seeps into your bones when no one sees how hard you're trying. He never saw. He was asleep by then, and when he woke up his pants were whole again, his belly was full again, his world intact again. He thought life just worked that way. Years later, I found one of those old pairs of jeans in a storage bin he left at my house. The patch was still there, though faded and slightly frayed around the edges. I ran my fingers over the stitching, and something inside me clenched. A kind of longing or grief or both. I held them to my chest like they were some kind of relic proof that I had been needed once. There was a night, too, when the landlord came knocking. Rent was overdue. I had to choose between paying the gas bill or buying groceries. I chose groceries. I always chose him. We huddled under extra blankets, and I made it a game, camping indoors, I called it. He thought it was fun. He didn't know I cried into my pillow after he fell asleep, afraid we might lose the apartment. I remember skipping dinners so he could have seconds, drinking hot water to trick my stomach into thinking I'd eaten, making up excuses about stomach aches when he offered to share. He never questioned it. Why would he? Mothers are invincible until they're not. And when I asked for nothing, it wasn't because I didn't want anything. I just wanted him to have everything. The years passed quickly in a blur of packed lunches and scraped knees, of last-minute science projects, and forgotten field trips. I somehow always made work. I kept all his report cards, even the ones where the teacher said he talks too much or needs to focus. I was proud anyway. I was always proud. One evening when he was about 12, he said something that landed like a slap. "You don't do anything, Mom. You're just home all day." He'd heard it from someone else, a friend's father, maybe. I laughed it off, but it stayed with me. It planted itself like a seed in my chest. Because he didn't know. He didn't see me filling out school forms late into the night. He didn't see me standing in line at second-hand stores, hoping to find something he wouldn't be ashamed to wear. He didn't see the calluses on my hands from cleaning houses, just the way I was always home when he needed me. I told myself then that one day when he was older he'd understand, that he'd look back and see the invisible scaffolding I built around his life, that he'd say, "I didn't know, Mom, thank you," but that day never came. Instead, the older he got, the more he seemed to pull away like someone escaping a cocoon that embarrassed him. I became background noise, a calendar reminder, a number saved as Mom that rarely lit up on his screen. I didn't ask for praise. I didn't need parades, just a moment of looking back, of seeing. And yet the older I get, the more I wonder if my love was too quiet, too hidden. Maybe he needed the kind of mother who asked for more, who demanded acknowledgement, who stood in the middle of the room and said, "I matter too." But I wasn't that woman. I was the kind who stayed up sewing jeans by candlelight, who skipped meals and smiled anyway, who gave until there was nothing left and still managed to give more. And all I wanted, truly, all I wanted was to hear him say thank you, just once, even softly, even in passing. I never asked for much. He was in 3rd grade the year I started writing notes in his lunchbox. Just a few words folded neatly and slipped between his sandwich and the apple. Have a great day, sweetheart. Mama loves you. You're braver than you think. I used to imagine him smiling when he found them, maybe showing his friends, maybe reading them twice. I thought I was giving him little anchors, small reminders that no matter how big the world felt, someone was always on his side. Years later, he told me he used to throw them away. They were embarrassing, he said with a shrug, like it meant nothing, like it was a funny little story. I laughed along. I didn't want him to see how much it stung. It wasn't about the paper or the words. It was the intention, the way I carved a piece of myself into each one, hoping he'd feel less alone in a world I couldn't protect him from entirely. I used to press a lipstick kiss at the bottom of some of them. He hated those most of all. I remember the morning he yelled at me in front of his friends, told me to stop. He was 12, maybe 13. You're not supposed to act like I'm 5, he snapped. His friends laughed. I stood there holding the brown paper bag, and something in me, something tender, folded in on itself. That was the last note I ever wrote. I still packed his lunch every morning, still cut his sandwiches into halves the way he liked, still peeled his oranges, still tucked in a napkin, still made sure nothing spilled. But I never wrote again, and he never noticed the silence. After he moved out, I found a small box in the back of his old closet. Inside were school projects, movie ticket stubs, a few birthday cards, and 3 of my lunchbox notes. 3. Out of the hundreds I'd written. I ran my fingers over them, my eyes catching on the smudged pencil marks, the faint trace of a kiss at the corner of one. I don't know why he kept those. Maybe he meant to throw them away. Maybe he forgot. Or maybe they meant more than he admitted. But that's the thing with motherhood. You pour yourself into a child so completely that even the smallest scrap of acknowledgement becomes sacred. You cling to crumbs and convince yourself they're a feast. I told myself for years that love is quiet, that you don't need thank yous when love is real, that being needed was its own kind of gratitude. But now, as the house grows quieter and the phone rings less and less, I'm not so sure. There's a loneliness in giving everything and being remembered for nothing. He's a father now. He packs his daughter's lunch posts about her art projects, jokes about her tantrums online. Sometimes he calls himself a girl dad and shares little stories about how hard parenting is. I see the comments. You're such a great dad. She's lucky to have you. I watch silently, reading every word, knowing that all those things I did quietly, consistently, without applause, were the same, maybe more. But no one saw me then. No one sees me now. The last time I visited, he handed me a plastic container with leftovers, and I smiled, thanked him, touched his arm. I looked at his daughter coloring on the floor, her hair falling over her face like a soft curtain, and I wanted to say something to pass on a little advice, a small bit of memory. I almost said, she'll remember the notes, but I stopped myself. Because maybe she won't, and maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point was never being remembered. Maybe it was the doing, the loving, the showing up, even when no one asked, even when no one said thank you. But even then, just once, I wanted to hear it. I wanted to be looked at, truly looked at, and told, you made things easier for me. You made things warmer. You mattered. Because I did. I know I did. And yet when I sit here in the evenings, tea growing cold in my hands, watching the light shift on the kitchen tiles, I wonder what might have happened if I had asked more. If I had said, this matters to me. I need to feel seen. But I didn't. I swallowed those needs like so many other things, because mothers are supposed to be selfless. That's what they say, isn't it? that love is giving without expecting. Still, it would have been nice, just once, a small note back, even a whisper. Thank you. It was a Tuesday, a small detail, but I remember it clearly. I had spent the whole afternoon making his favorite meal. Braised pork belly slowly simmered in coconut water, just the way he liked it as a boy, with soft-boiled eggs nestled in the pot. I remember the smell filling the house, rich and warm, wrapping around me like a memory. I set the table with care, even lit a small candle, silly as that might sound. I wanted it to feel special. I wanted him to feel special. He had said he'd come by after work. I'll swing by Ma around 6, he texted. Just like that. Short, almost rushed. I read it over and over anyway. I changed my blouse, combed my hair. I even tucked the ends of the tablecloth just right and added a folded napkin next to his plate. 6 came, then 6:30. I turned the stove to low, let the food keep warm. I told myself there was traffic, that he'd call, that he hadn't forgotten. By 7, the candle had burned halfway down. I sat at the table, watching the flame, feeling its warmth fade inch by inch. By 8, I turned off the stove. At 9, I packed the food into containers, carefully labeling them for the fridge. Still no word. At 10, he texted. Sorry things ran late, we'll come next week. I stared at those words. 6 of them. No punctuation, no love you, no thanks. Just a dismissal disguised as apology. I didn't reply. I didn't trust myself to. I sat back down at the table and looked across at the empty seat, the napkin still folded, his plate untouched, the smell of pork and soy and star anise still clinging to the air like a ghost that wouldn't leave. And I thought, this is how it happens, isn't it? The slow fade, the quiet forgetting, the way love becomes background noise. He used to love this meal. He used to ask for second helpings. He used to kiss my cheek and say, "You make it better than anyone." Now it was just leftovers, a relic of a connection he didn't feel anymore. I didn't cry that night. I thought I might, but instead I just felt hollow, as if my love had turned into something invisible, undetectable, like the steam rising off the rice, visible for a moment, then gone. I carried the containers to the fridge one by one like something sacred, like holding pieces of myself. I knew I'd eat them alone over the week, even though they didn't taste the same cold. I'd force it down, chew slowly, not because I was hungry, but because I didn't want to waste it. I sat in the dark afterward. No television, no music, just the soft tick of the wall clock. I thought of all the times I showed up when no one asked, all the sacrifices I made without ever making a list. No one ever teaches you how to grieve someone who's still alive, who still exists, still breathes, still has your name saved in their phone but never calls. Someone who looks right through you when you speak, who forgets the dinners, the candles, the care, who treats your love like furniture, always there, silent, expected. I think that night was a turning point. Not because I stopped loving him. That's not how a mother's heart works, but because something inside me shifted. I stopped believing that love alone would bring him back to me. That effort would equal gratitude. That food could fix what silence had corroded. I stopped expecting a thank you. Or maybe I just stopped hoping for it. It's strange how the absence of something can become so loud. The absence of his footsteps at the door, the absence of his laugh at the table, the absence of his voice saying, "Smells amazing, Ma." I filled the silence with memory, replayed old scenes like movies. I couldn't stop watching the ones where he was small and his hand still reached for mine, the ones where my love was still enough. I think every mother at some point sits across from an empty chair and realizes she's been feeding ghosts. I just didn't think that moment would come so quietly, so undramatically. But that's the way forgetting works, doesn't it? It doesn't shout. It seeps. And that Tuesday, sitting there alone in my clean blouse with a plate that never got touched, I realized I was still setting the table for someone who no longer remembered to come home. He gave me the tour of his new home with a kind of detached pride, like he was narrating someone else's life. Modern appliances, pale wood floors, a kitchen island. I could never imagine using too tall, too cold. His wife showed me the nursery with soft colors and minimalist decor, the kind you see in magazines, not memories. I smiled politely, said all the right things. It's beautiful. You've done so well. She's lucky to have this. I meant it, but I also meant more. I meant I remember when you were small, too. I remember what it was to build something from nothing. But what I remember didn't seem to matter much. As we moved into the living room, I noticed the walls, covered in frames, dozens of them. His wedding photo, a collage of his daughter's first birthday, group shots with friends at barbecues, vacations, holidays, some old childhood pictures too, him at the beach, him holding a trophy, him in his graduation gown. Not one photo of me. I looked 3 times slowly, carefully, like maybe I'd missed it. Like maybe it was there in the corner tucked behind a curtain or set beside the lamp. But no, not a single one. I stood in that beautiful polished living room, wrapped in all the moments that defined his life, and realized I had been cropped out. Not angrily, not maliciously, just invisibly. He noticed me looking. I keep meaning to get one of you and Dad up, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. You know how busy it gets. I nodded, smiled, laughed even a little just to keep the silence from swallowing us both. But inside something collapsed, something small, something old, like a bridge you didn't realize was rotting until it snapped beneath your weight. I thought of the photo he'd once made in kindergarten, cut and pasted paper hearts around a picture of us together. I still have it. Tucked in the top drawer of my nightstand, yellowed at the edges. He doesn't remember it, but I do. I always have. I remember sitting beside him while he learned to tie his shoes. I remember holding him through every fever, every heartbreak, every lost game. I was the one steady presence, always just behind the camera, never in the frame. And now, quite literally, I had disappeared from the walls of his life. We sat for coffee afterward. He scrolled on his phone, pausing occasionally to show me videos of his daughter babbling, taking wobbly steps. I cooed, smiled, tried to offer warmth, but I felt like an outsider, like a guest. When did I stop being part of the story? He asked if I could babysit next weekend. I said yes, of course. I always do. He kissed the top of my head absently as he walked me out, a gesture that felt more like habit than affection. I stood on his porch for a moment before walking to the street, letting the air settle around me. The bus ride home was long and quiet. I stared out the window at the city flashing by stores. I didn't shop at any more restaurants we used to walk past when he was small, clinging to my hand and asking for noodles. He doesn't cling anymore, and he doesn't ask. Back at my apartment, I walked to my bedroom, opened the drawer, and pulled out that photo with the hearts, the one with crooked scissors and smudged glue. He was missing his 2 front teeth. I was smiling in that picture, so open, so full of light. We looked happy, because we were. Because in that moment, I was everything to him. Now I'm not even a frame on the wall. I wanted to tear it up. I didn't. Instead, I laid it gently on my bed and sat beside it, traced the hearts with my finger, whispered, "You used to see me." That was all I said. That was all there was to say. I think what hurts most isn't that I'm forgotten. It's that I was once remembered so completely, so loudly, and now I'm not. that I went from being his whole sky to being convenient, background. And still I love him. That's the trick of it. I love him with the same soft steadiness that sewed his torn jeans and folded his lunch notes. I love him from the back of the room, from the edge of his memory. But sometimes I wonder what it would feel like to be seen again. Not out of duty, not out of guilt, but because he genuinely wanted to remember where he came from, who stood behind him when no one else could, who gave him everything and only asked to be included. Just one photo, that's all it would have taken. One square of space on that perfect wall. But there wasn't one. And that absence was louder than anything he said that day. He always ends our calls the same way. I'll visit soon, Mom. And every time something inside me quietly folds up that promise and sets it on a dusty shelf with all the others where they sit untouched, growing stale with time. They're like old postcards with no addresses floating between hope and forgetting. I've learned not to ask anymore, not because I don't want to see him, God knows I do, but because the asking makes me feel small, needy, like someone who hasn't earned the right to take up space in his life anymore. The last few times I asked, his voice got that tired edge. Things are crazy right now, or we've got a lot on our plate. I know those phrases by heart now like lullabies with no melody. The weeks blur together, the months too. The seasons turn and still I wait. I always find an excuse to stay ready. I keep the guest sheets clean. I buy his favorite tea when I see it on sale. I even keep his old bedroom dusted, though no one has slept in it for years. Once I baked an apple pie from scratch, because he mentioned missing it in passing on the phone. It cooled on the counter untouched for 3 days before I finally threw it away. The smell lingered longer than the hope. There was a time when he would visit just to talk. We'd sit on the porch with mugs of tea and he'd ramble about work or friends or nothing in particular. He used to seek me out for comfort. Now even small talk feels like a courtesy he performs, rushed tight like a man ticking boxes. It's strange how you can go from being the center of someone's world to being a background thought, a reminder they keep snoozing. I'll visit soon, Mom. Soon used to mean next weekend. Then it meant next month. Now it doesn't mean anything. It's just a placeholder, a soft, lazy lie dressed up as hope. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I stopped answering, if I let his calls go to voicemail, if I left his messages unread. Would he notice? Would he call again, worried? Or would he simply stop? The thought terrifies me, and yet it also tempts me, because there's something exhausting about always being the one waiting. Waiting is a weight that builds quietly, not dramatic, not loud, just steady, like water wearing down stone. I've started to mark the days he doesn't come in a little notebook I keep in my drawer. I don't know why. Maybe it's a kind of proof that time is passing, that I'm still here, that my disappointment isn't imagined. Page after page of blank spaces. No knock at the door, no footsteps on the stairs, no voice saying, "Hi, Ma." One Sunday I waited for hours after he said he might swing by if things calmed down. I set 2 plates at the table just in case. I put on the sweater he once said made me look cozy. I even made his favorite noodle soup. It sat cooling in the pot. I sat beside it, bowl untouched. He didn't come, didn't call, didn't text. And I didn't reach out either. I just sat there staring at the bowl, the steam softening and vanishing like something exhaling its last breath. I remember once reading that you should never wait too long for someone who isn't waiting for you, but mothers do. We wait by instinct. We wait by memory. We wait because we can't not. But that Sunday changed something. I didn't clear the dishes right away. I let them sit, let the silence take up space, and then very quietly I whispered into the empty room, I'm tired of waiting. It wasn't anger, just truth. I love him more than my own breath, but I can't keep holding my life like an open door he never walks through. Now when he says I'll visit soon, I just say take your time, and I mean it, because I can't keep chasing closeness that only comes when it's convenient for him. He used to run to me after school, arms outstretched, calling Mom like I was his whole world. Now I'm just a voice on the other end of a call he makes while driving distracted, checking his rearview mirror between sentences. And still I show up. Still I keep the tea in the cupboard. Still I fold the extra sheets. Because love is stubborn, and so am I. But the difference now is, I've stopped expecting the doorbell. It was such a small thing, a jar of pickled garlic. I had made it myself the way my mother once taught me, layering each clove with slices of chili and just the right balance of salt and sweetness. It takes time, you know, weeks of soaking, days of checking, shaking, waiting. I don't do it often anymore. My hands aren't what they used to be. They tremble sometimes, especially when I'm tired or cold. But I made it for him. Because he mentioned once offhandedly that he missed the kind I used to keep in the fridge when he was a boy. So I did it, carefully with love stitched into every step. I even found an old jar with a blue lid he used, till like said it reminded him of summer. I wrapped it in a towel and took 2 buses to bring it to his house. He opened the door, surprised. You didn't have to come all this way, he said, stepping aside without really looking at me. He didn't offer a hug, not even a glass of water, just stood there tapping his phone while I untied the towel and handed him the jar like it was a gift I was embarrassed to give. Oh, cool, he said, glancing at it. Thanks. He set it down on the counter and didn't look at it again. No, this must have taken a lot of work. No, I can't believe you remembered. Not even a second glance. Just placed and forgotten. We sat on the couch and he scrolled through emails, half listening, as I asked about his daughter, his work. I tried not to show how much effort it had taken me to come, how much it mattered that I had made something just for him, just because I wanted to. He didn't notice that my hands were trembling more than usual, or that I sat stiffly afraid the sadness might leak out of me if I moved the wrong way. Eventually he stood up and said I should get back to this presentation. I nodded, smiled, picked up my purse. He walked me to the door, gave me a quick pat on the shoulder. Thanks again for the garlic, he said, as if it had cost me nothing. As I stepped outside, the wind caught my scarf and pulled it loose. I clutched it close, suddenly aware of how cold I was, how long the trip back would be, how long I had waited just for this small, hollow moment. Later I found out from his sister that he had never even opened the jar, said he forgot it was there, said it probably went bad. And I remembered that moment, the way my hands shook as I packed it, the bus seat that smelled faintly of old fabric and diesel, the way my heart fluttered at the thought of him tasting something that came from my memory of him, my care for him. And I felt foolish, not angry, not even sad, just foolish, like a woman clinging to rituals no one remembered but her. There's a particular pain in offering something of yourself, something made with love, made with your aging hands, and watching it be received like a favor, like an obligation, like background noise. It made me think about how often I used to open jars for him when he was little, how he'd hand them to me with wide eyes, trusting I could always twist things open, always make things better. My hands were strong then, my body younger, my love unquestioned. Now when I struggle with jars myself, I think of that boy, the one who believed in me, and I wonder, when did that faith disappear? When did my usefulness expire? He sees my hands now as old, clumsy. He doesn't notice how much they still try. That night I sat at my kitchen table and soaked my fingers in warm water and vinegar to ease the ache. I watched the light outside grow dim, and I whispered I didn't ask for thanks. But even as I said it, I felt the lie tremble on my lips. Because I did, not out loud, not in words, but in effort, in time, in all the tiny, invisible ways I tried to stay present in his life. I asked with every homemade dish, every bus ride, every trembling hand that still tried to hold him close. I didn't ask for a parade. I didn't ask for flowers. But I did want to be seen. And that jar, that little silly jar of garlic, was the last time I brought him something from my kitchen. Because when your hands start trembling and your gifts are left unopened, you begin to realize it's not about the garlic. It's about the fact that they stopped tasting what you offered a long time ago. Hospitals are always cold, no matter how many blankets they give you. The walls hum softly, machines beep in gentle rhythms, and everyone speaks in voices just below concern. I remember lying there waiting for the anesthesiologist to come staring at the ceiling tiles that looked just like the ones from my childhood school. I remember thinking how strange it was to have spent your whole life caring for others, only to end up surrounded by strangers at your most vulnerable. It wasn't a major surgery, but at my age, every surgery feels like it might be. I had told him about it the week before. It's nothing urgent, I said, but they want to take care of it soon. He barely looked up from his phone. Okay, let me know how it goes, he replied, as though I was telling him about a haircut. The morning of, I took a cab alone. I'd packed my own bag, brought a sweater in case I got cold. In the waiting room, I watched other patients check in, most with someone by their side, a wife, a daughter, a husband, someone to hold their hand. I clutched mine together in my lap, trying to feel like two was enough. The nurse was kind. She asked if I had family waiting for me. I smiled, said no, said it was fine. And it was in a way. I had gotten used to doing things alone. But that morning when they wheeled me into that too bright room, something inside me whispered, he should be here, not out of obligation, out of love. When I woke up groggy and shivering, there was a single message on my phone. Hope it goes okay. 4 words, no punctuation, no call, no, do you need anything? No visit. Just that. I read it over and over as if more meaning would bloom from repetition. It didn't. I spent one night there drifting in and out of sleep while the machines hummed and nurses checked vitals. My neighbor in the next bed had her daughter sitting beside her knitting, quietly reading aloud when her mother asked. They shared grapes and soft laughter. I turned away, staring at the curtain that separated us, and thought of how many times I had sat by his bedside holding ice chips to his lips, when he had fevers reading picture books to him, when he was too sick to go to school. He had once been my entire world, and now I was a small footnote in his. The next morning, I checked myself out. The nurse offered to call someone to pick me up. I said no. I took a cab, resting my hands carefully in my lap the whole ride home. My body ached, but it was the hollowness that hurt more. At home, the silence felt sharper. I poured myself tea, though it tasted of nothing. I sat at the table waiting for what I wasn't sure. A call, a knock, a moment of concern. It didn't come. That afternoon, I received another message. How are you feeling? I stared at it. 5 words this time. Progress, maybe. I typed fine, resting, and hit send. He didn't reply. That was it. He didn't ask if I needed groceries. He didn't offer to drop by. He didn't even ask what the doctors said. I suppose he assumed if I didn't die, everything was fine. And in a way, that's how he's learned to think of me. Durable, enduring, like a tree in the background, always standing, always there, never needing anything, just giving shade. But even trees fall. That night I sat by the window, watching the streetlights blur through the glass. I touched the tender spot on my side where the stitches pulled, and I whispered I wouldn't have let you go through it alone. And I wouldn't have, even if we weren't speaking, even if he didn't ask. I've sat by his bedside through all the broken bones, the flus, the heartaches. I've held his hand when he was scared, brought him soup when he couldn't eat, stayed up through the night when the doctors weren't sure. I was there, always there. But for me, a text, a one-sentence text. And I realized then, not bitterly but clearly, that he didn't see me as someone who needed care, only as someone who gives it. And I don't blame him entirely. I taught him that. I made it look easy. I made myself small so he could feel safe. I never showed my own fear, never showed my fragility. But now I'm older, I am fragile, and I need care too. I just never asked for it out loud. It was the photo that made me stop scrolling his daughter standing on a wooden step stool in their kitchen, icing cupcakes with crooked little fingers, her face smeared with chocolate and joy. The caption read, 3 generations of sweet tooth in this family. The comments flooded in. She's adorable, like father, like daughter. So precious. He liked every one of them. I stared at the screen, at the glowing little heart icon, at the clean counters and polished white tiles of the kitchen I had once helped him choose. I zoomed in without meaning to, looking for some small sign that I belonged. A mug I gave them, a hand towel I embroidered, something. There was nothing. No mention of me, no tag, no grandma made the recipe. Just cupcake smiles, and a story that erased the first woman who ever held a wooden spoon in that boy's life. He had never asked if I wanted to meet her, not properly, not with intention. He once said, "You should stop by sometime when she's awake," but it never materialized. Every time I offered, there was some excuse. She's got a cold, we're busy, maybe next week. The child doesn't know my voice. She doesn't know my face. I don't know how she laughs or cries, or if she likes oranges or hates the crust on her sandwiches. I don't know if she runs to her parents when she's scared. I don't know what kind of songs they sing to her at bedtime. I don't know anything really. But I do know what it's like to be forgotten while still living, to be made into a ghost in a family that you built with your own hands. Once, when he was very small, he had a fever that wouldn't break. I stayed up for 3 nights, rocking him in the bathroom with the shower running, to create steam, holding his body close to mine, as if love could sweat the sickness out. I remember how he looked up at me with glassy eyes and said, "Don't go, Mama." And I didn't. I stayed until the fever broke, until he slept, until I could breathe again. Now it feels like he's the one who's gone, and I'm the one whispering, "Please come back." I printed that photo from his post. I don't know why. Maybe I just needed to hold a part of her. I slipped it into a frame and placed it on my bookshelf beside the faded picture of him in his school uniform holding a paper star he made me for Mother's Day. They sit side by side now, 2 pieces of my heart who don't really know each other, one too young, the other too distracted. I imagine what it might be like to bake with her, to show her how to roll dough, to hum old lullabies, while the kitchen fills with the smell of cinnamon. I imagine her asking, "Did Daddy help you bake when he was little?" and me smiling gently saying, "He used to sit on the counter and steal spoonfuls when he thought I wasn't looking." But these are just stories I tell myself in the quiet. Because I'm not in his stories. I'm not the one he thinks of when he writes about family. I'm not the memory he's passing down. I once asked him softly, carefully, why he hadn't brought her by. He blinked, surprised. "I don't know, Ma. I guess I didn't think it mattered that much to you." Didn't matter. I nodded, of course, smiled, said it's okay, sweetheart. You're busy. But that night I sat by the window with a cup of lukewarm tea and felt like something inside me had gone still, like a door had closed and no one noticed. I don't blame the child. How could I? She doesn't know me. She's just living the life her parents shaped for her, and he's shaping it without me, as if I were a chapter he doesn't plan to reread. Still, when I light incense in the morning, I whisper her name now. I say her name as a prayer, not that she will know me, but that she will be loved, fully, gently. And maybe if the wind is kind, she'll inherit some small piece of the warmth I once gave him. And if one day she asks, was there a grandma who used to make garlic pickles, I hope he remembers. I hope he says yes. Because I may not be in the pictures, but I was here. I am here. The calendar reminded me before he did. That's how I knew Mother's Day was coming. I saw the little note I had scribbled months ago, buy orchids, if on sale. Wear the blue blouse, as if preparing for disappointment requires its own ritual. That Sunday came with quiet sun and an aching kind of silence. I rose early anyway, force of habit. Put the kettle on, dusted the shelves, laid out the good teacups just in case. I even turned on the radio for a bit of soft music, hoping it might fill the space where a voice should be, where his voice should be. But the phone never rang. At noon, I checked my messages. Nothing. Not a single word. I refreshed the screen as if it might change the truth, as if love could be reloaded. Instead, I opened social media and saw his post. A simple image, a selfie of his daughter handing a flower to her mother, captioned, "To the woman who does it all. Happy Mother's Day." And that was it. No mention of me, no note, no tag, no repost of that old black and white picture we once took in the park. Nothing. I sat down hard like someone had pulled the air from the room. Not because I expected balloons or brunch. Just a word. One. A thinking of you. A thank you. Anything to suggest I hadn't become invisible. Because I was a mother long before she was. I wiped his nose, sat through his school plays, slept on hospital floors. I gave up dreams and plans and rest, and still I loved with everything I had. And yet when the world celebrates mothers, I am not among the remembered. It's a strange thing realizing you've become a shadow in your child's story. Later that day, I made myself tea and took it to the porch. The cup was chipped at the rim, but I used it anyway. It was the one he made me at summer camp, painted in clumsy brushstrokes that once read, "Best Mom Ever." The words have mostly faded, but I still see them. I cupped the mug in my hands, let the heat sink into my fingers, and tried not to feel bitter. There are people who say, you should tell him how you feel. But how do you explain to someone that the wound isn't from something he did, but from everything he didn't do, from all the empty spaces where care should have lived? That kind of grief is quiet. It wears soft slippers and sits beside you while you smile through small talk. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand. It just waits. That night, I didn't call him. I didn't ask where my message was. I didn't send a reminder like I sometimes used to, a little nudge with a laughing emoji, a joke about forgetting old ladies. I didn't have the strength to chase affection anymore. And I realized with a strange calm that this was the last time I would let this day break me. Next year, I will mark the day differently. I will not wait. I will not set the table. I will not open the door for footsteps that never arrive. Instead, I'll make a cake, not the kind he likes, but the kind I do rich with dark chocolate soft in the middle. I will buy myself the flowers. I will wear the blue blouse not in hope, but in pride. And I will sit on that same porch, not as someone forgotten, but as someone whole. Because whether he remembers or not, whether he calls or not, whether he posts or not, I was a mother. I am a mother, and I mothered him with my whole heart. That deserves a celebration, even if I'm the only one at the table. It was after an argument, not a loud one, but sharp in the way a paper cut is. Small, swift, deeper than it looks. We had been on the phone. I don't even remember how it started. Something about him needing to reschedule a visit again. Something about how I'd said, "It would be nice if you came when you said you would." That was all. Just a simple sentence. A small truth. He sighed on the other end, heavy and tight. "You always make everything about you," he said. The words landed with more force than I think he intended. Or maybe he did mean it. Maybe it had been waiting to slip out. Years of held-back frustration or guilt or whatever distance had built up between us poured out into that one careless sentence. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, stunned. My mouth opened, but no words came. I waited for him to say something else to walk it back, soften it, say he didn't mean it. But silence followed, long, awkward, hollow. "Okay," I finally whispered and hung up. I stared at the phone in my lap for a long time, like it might ring again. Like he might call back and say, "I'm sorry, Mom. That wasn't fair." But it didn't ring, and he didn't. I replayed his words over and over in my head. "You always make everything about you." The irony of it, really. The bitter twist. Because for so many years I had done nothing but make everything about him. I made choices for him. I made sacrifices for him. I made room. I gave up pieces of myself, hobbies, friendships, chances, all because I wanted to make his life easier, fuller, better. And now for simply asking that he come when he promised that he remember me once in a while, I was making it about me. What a strange punishment to be scolded for wanting to be seen. I didn't call him for days. Not out of spite, but because I was scared of what I might say. Scared that if I opened my mouth, years of quiet heartbreak would spill out and flood everything. And I didn't want to drown him. I just wanted him to pause, to see the woman behind the title of Mom. I began to notice how invisible I'd become, not just to him, but to the world. People spoke around me, not to me. Clerks at stores looked past me. Strangers on the bus avoided eye contact. I became aware of my silence, the way I rarely interrupted, the way I always moved out of the way. Was I really making things about me, or was I finally daring to ask for something, anything, after a lifetime of swallowing my needs? I thought about how many meals I had cooked without ever asking what I wanted to eat. How many birthdays I spent planning his celebration. How many of my own sorrows I kept to myself so he wouldn't feel burdened. And now that one small request for him to simply follow through on his promise was too much. It made me question everything, not just him, me, who I had become, who I had allowed myself to become. Because there's a difference between love and erasure, and somewhere along the way I had let love erase me. I cried that night, not for him, not even because of the words, but because I saw myself clearly, the way you see something under harsh light for the first time. I saw the woman who had asked for so little and still been told it was too much. And then something surprising happened. I laughed, quietly then a little louder, because what a ridiculous thing to be afraid of wanting, afraid of saying I matter. That was the moment I decided I would no longer explain my worth. Not to him, not to anyone. I am not selfish for wanting to be remembered. I am not dramatic for wanting a visit kept, a call returned, a sentence softened with love. I'm not making it about me when I say I still exist. And if that makes me difficult, so be it. I have been everything for him, a home, a meal, a light left on. Now I will be something for myself, There was a time I used to explain him to everyone, at church, at the market, even to the neighbor who politely asked, "How's your son doing these days?" I would smile quickly and say, "Oh, he's busy. You know how life gets." And I'd launch into a story that made it sound like everything was fine, like he called often, like he dropped by, like I wasn't sitting in that empty apartment for days on end folding laundry that no one would see. I made him into a character people would admire. He's doing so well at work. His daughter's growing so fast. He's such a good father. I told them those things, not because they asked, but because I wanted to believe them myself. I wanted to believe he was still the boy who once climbed into my lap just to be held. The boy who used to bring me wilted flowers from the sidewalk and say, "For you, Mama." But at some point I stopped. Not out of anger, no, I don't think anger ever truly lived in me when it came to him, but out of exhaustion. Out of the ache that builds when you hear your own voice trying to make something sound like it still fits when it no longer does. I remember sitting across from a friend one afternoon, someone I hadn't seen in years, and when she asked, "Does he still call often?" I opened my mouth and found nothing. No sweet story, no soft excuse, just silence. And in that moment, I realized I couldn't keep pretending. I was tired of dressing up absence as busyness, tired of defending someone who no longer thought to defend me. So I just said, "Not much anymore." And I watched her pause, eyes, gentle words, slow. "I'm sorry," she said. I nodded. "Me too." That was the first time I spoke the truth aloud. Not all of it, not the whole tangle of hurt and loyalty and quiet grief, but just enough. Enough to feel the smallest shift inside me, like loosening a tight collar that had been there so long I'd forgotten how to breathe freely. After that, I stopped telling stories that weren't real. When people asked, I told them the truth in small, quiet pieces. "He's busy. We don't talk much. I'm okay." And the more I spoke plainly, the more I started hearing myself again. Hearing the woman who existed before she became a mother, before she became a ghost in someone else's life. I think sometimes we love so deeply that we forget we're allowed to have limits, that we're allowed to stop chasing someone's attention, that we're allowed to stop explaining ourselves, defending ourselves, shrinking ourselves. I had spent years shrinking, minimizing my loneliness, minimizing the way my heart reached out every time the phone buzzed, hoping it was him, minimizing the way my chest tightened every time it wasn't. Now I let the phone ring without checking it. I let the questions go unanswered. I let the lies I used to tell unravel like old yarn. Because I've learned that love without reciprocity becomes a weight, and I've been carrying it long enough. It doesn't mean I love him less. It means I love myself a little more. That realization didn't come with fireworks or some big revelation. It came quietly, like peeling wallpaper, like breath returning after being held for too long. And in that quiet, I began to find myself again. Not the mother, not the caretaker, not the woman who waited by the window. Just me. I still have moments when I want to explain, when I see someone smile at a memory, and I want to join in to say, "Yes, I know that feeling. I used to have a boy who called me just to tell me he loved me, but I don't." I let the moment pass, because I no longer need to convince the world that I matter in his story. I matter in mine. I had been going through an old box of photos one afternoon, not for any particular reason, just because the light was soft, and the house was quiet, and sometimes memories asked to be touched. The pictures were faded, curling at the corners, school recitals, vacations by the lake, him asleep in the back seat of the car, mouth open, cheeks sunburned. And then I found it one of the few where we were both in the frame. It was a candid shot, taken by a stranger, I think. We were sitting on a bench, him maybe 10 years old, legs swinging crumbs on his shirt. I was looking at him, laughing at something he said. My face was full of light. He was mid-sentence, hands animated. We looked so alive, so close, like nothing would ever wedge itself between us. I stared at it for a long time. Then I placed it in an envelope. No note, no explanation, just the photograph. I mailed it to him the next day. Not because I thought he'd call when he saw it, not because I thought it would change anything, but because it was the only thing left to send a fragment of what we used to be offered like a final bridge. I don't know if he received it. He never mentioned it, never messaged, never acknowledged it in passing. And that silence, it felt like the final confirmation, like the closing of a book I had kept trying to reread, hoping for a different ending. That evening I washed the dishes slowly, one by one. The light from the window was golden, casting long, quiet shadows on the counter. I didn't cry. I just moved gently, letting the rhythm of the water soothe me. I had always been the one to hold on, the one who kept birthdays and recipes and photos and the soft weight of memories alive. But this time I let go, not out of anger, not out of despair, but because I was done offering parts of myself that would never be held with care. I still love him. That hasn't changed. It probably never will. But love doesn't mean endless reaching. Sometimes love is the quiet act of stepping back. Sometimes love is knowing when your presence is no longer a welcome gift, but a tolerated obligation. And so I stopped. I stopped checking my phone every evening. I stopped keeping his favorite tea stocked in the cupboard. I stopped saying maybe next time when friends asked if he was visiting. I started saying no, he doesn't come much anymore. And I said it with peace, not bitterness, not shame, just truth. The day after I mailed that photo, I cleared a drawer, one that had held old cards, scribbled drawings, little mementos. I didn't throw them away. I'm not made of stone, but I put them in a box, sealed it, and slid it to the back of the closet. I needed the space. I wanted room for something else, not someone else, just a version of myself that didn't live at the end of someone else's priorities. And for the first time in years, I took a walk without my phone. I didn't want to be reachable. I didn't want to be waiting. I wanted to hear my own breath, feel the gravel under my feet, smell the old jasmine blooming by the fence near the park. I wanted to belong to myself for a while. That night, as I sat with a book and a blanket draped over my knees, I looked around the room, soft lamplight, the ticking clock, the stillness, and realized something both painful and liberating. I don't need to be in his life to prove that I mattered in it. I did matter. I know I did. The photo was proof. The memories were real. And my love, it shaped his world in ways he may never acknowledge. But I don't need a thank you anymore. I just needed to say goodbye without fanfare. And that envelope, silent, simple, containing only a photo, was my goodbye. Letting go didn't happen all at once. It never does. It's not a dramatic scene like in the movies where someone slams a door or throws something into the wind. Letting go is slower, quieter, like placing something down gently after realizing you've been carrying it too long. It began in little ways. I stopped checking the mailbox for cards on my birthday. I stopped baking the desserts he used to like. I started lighting candles at night, just because I liked the scent, not because I thought he might visit. I began taking walks without telling anyone. I let the hours pass without looking at the clock, without wondering if he'd call. And in those quiet spaces, something surprising started to grow. Peace. Not the kind that feels triumphant. No fireworks. No victorious soundtrack. Just a soft, steady silence. A stillness that didn't ache the way it used to. A breath that didn't feel so heavy. I began to feel the shape of my own life again, not as a shadow cast by someone else, but as something solid, something worth tending. I had spent so long reaching, offering, bending, softening myself around the sharp edges of someone else's disinterest. I had folded myself into silence, thinking that love meant never asking, never needing, never breaking the spell of gratitude I'd wrapped around him since he was a boy. But peace comes when you begin to see clearly, and I began to see. I saw that I had been writing letters no one read, setting tables no one sat at, loving with both hands outstretched, hoping, praying to be caught just once in return. And now my hands rest in my lap, still open, yes, but not empty, not waiting, just still. I don't know exactly when it happened, but one evening I found myself humming, not a song from the radio, not something I heard on TV, just a tune from my own childhood, the kind I used to hum before I had children, before my identity became wrapped around the word mom. That's when I realized I was still here. Beneath the layers of care and service of meals and worry and sacrifice, there was still a woman, a whole woman, and she deserved her own tenderness. So I gave it to her. I started writing again, little notes in a diary, not for anyone else, just for me. I began writing things like, I mattered today, and I took a walk, and the sun was soft, and I didn't think of him for 3 whole hours. That felt like a victory. I started wearing perfume again, not because someone might notice, but because I liked how it made me feel when I caught a whisper of it on my sweater. I put earrings in for the first time in months. I looked at myself in the mirror and said, you were more than enough. Because I was. I am. Letting go doesn't mean I've stopped loving him. That's not how it works. Love doesn't vanish when it isn't returned. It settles. It transforms. It reroots itself in new places. It curls around your own heart and says, you too deserve the softness you gave away. So I gave that to myself. I still keep a few of his old photos on the shelf, not to torture myself, but to remember, not him necessarily, but the part of me that loved so freely. I want to honor her. She was brave. She showed up even when it hurt. But now I no longer let that pain define me. Now I sit in the mornings with my tea watching the light spill over the counter, and I feel the smallest flicker of joy. Not loud, not overwhelming, just present. And that is enough. I no longer count the days between his calls. I no longer scan the street for his car. I no longer wait for holidays with a knot in my chest. Because I've learned to fill the space he left with something else, something quieter, but more lasting. Me. It was a Tuesday when the jasmine outside bloomed again, that first breath of fragrance, floating in through the open window, wrapping around my morning like an old friend. I stood by the sink, hands deep in dishwater, and felt something loosen inside me. A memory, maybe. Or maybe just a reminder that life still blossoms even when no one's watching. I used to imagine he'd show up on a day like this. No warning, just a knock at the door and a sheepish smile. I was in the neighborhood. I used to picture that moment over and over, what I'd say, what I wouldn't, whether I'd pretend not to have waited, whether I'd tell him the truth. But the day never came. And now I'm not waiting anymore. Letting go wasn't a moment, it was a series of soft decisions. To take the folded sweaters from his old room and donate them, to take the empty picture frame off the hallway wall and hang a painting I bought for myself, to close the cupboard where I kept his favorite tea and fill it with things I actually use. Honey, lavender, dark chocolate. To stop living in pause. I still love him, but I no longer shape my days around him. I no longer hold my breath when the phone rings. I answer when I feel like it. I speak only the truth. I'm doing well. I've been quiet. No, you don't need to bring anything. And I mean it. The last time he called, it was quick. A check-in, a surface skim across our lives. I listened. I nodded. I smiled in all the right places. And when he said, "Let's do dinner soon," I said, "That would be nice." But I didn't ask when. I didn't write it on the calendar. I didn't wait. Because the truth is, I've found peace without the promise. I found that I am not just a mother. I am a woman with quiet rituals. I am the sound of a chair sliding across the kitchen floor, the feel of warm socks pulled over tired feet. I am the scent of jasmine on a Tuesday morning. I am the choice to keep going, to keep soft, to stay kind, even when it isn't returned. There is power in quiet dignity. There is freedom in no longer needing to explain your worth. There is healing in choosing yourself after a lifetime of being chosen, second, third, or not at all. I didn't need his thanks anymore. Not because it wouldn't have meant something, but because I finally stopped needing to be seen by someone who had long since stopped looking. And now I sit in my favorite chair by the window. I wear the soft cardigan with the frayed sleeve. I drink tea from a chipped cup that warms my hands just right. I write in my notebook small things what the sky looked like this morning, the name of a bird I heard singing the way the light falls through the curtain like lace. And I know this. I was never invisible. I was never small. I gave everything I had, and it was beautiful, even if no one ever said thank you. The house is quiet now, but not in the way it used to be. Not the silence of waiting, not the silence of absence. It's a chosen stillness, a soft breath after a long song. I sit with my tea, letting the warmth curl through my fingers. Outside, the wind stirs the branches, and the jasmine moves like a whisper, gentle, unhurried, unashamed to bloom. I think of all the years I gave, the years I bent, the years I waited, and I don't feel bitter. I feel human, worn in the way old wood is worn, strong in the way rivers carve their own paths without asking permission. They forgot me, but I never forgot myself. And that, I think, is the quiet triumph, to still be here, still whole, still soft in a world that taught me to harden. I don't need to be loud. I don't need to be remembered in stories he tells. I remember me. I remember every patch sewn, every lunch packed, every tear wiped away. And when I close my eyes tonight, I'll whisper one last thing, not to him, not to anyone else, but to myself. Thank you